The desert sun was dropping low, spilling its last light across the red canyon walls like fire melting into dust. The air was still, except for the dry whisper of wind stirring the sagebrush. Somewhere in that vast emptiness, a horse's slow tread broke the silence. The rider, an Apache with deep lines carved across his face from years of sun and hardship, guided his Mustang through the ravine, his eyes scanning the horizon for movement. He had learned long ago that quiet didn't always mean safety. He was heading back to camp when he saw her, a figure stumbling along the rocky path, her pale dress torn, her shoes lost to the cruel ground. She looked too out of place to belong to this land. The girl froze when she saw him. Dust clung to her hair and face, and her breathing came in short, desperate bursts. He didn't raise his weapon, though his hand rested near it, steady and ready. She took a hesitant step forward, clutching her arms as though to keep herself from falling apart. "I promise I won't cause any trouble. Just don't make me go back to him," she said, her voice trembling but firm. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind sighed through the canyon, carrying the cry of a distant hawk. The Apache studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. She looked no older than 20, though fear and exhaustion had made her seem older. There was a kind of wild desperation in her face, the kind that comes when someone's been running not just from danger but from something that had already broken them once before. He didn't answer. Instead, he dismounted slowly and let his horse drink from a shallow stream nearby. The girl's gaze followed him, uncertain, waiting for a sign that he would turn her away, or worse. But he didn't move toward her. He didn't threaten her. He just stood there, quiet as the desert itself, until the sound of her crying began to fill the silence she couldn't bear. She sank to her knees, the fabric of her dress brushing the dust. "Please, I can't go back. I'd rather die out here than face him again." The Apache looked at her then, really looked, and what he saw must have struck something deep within him. He wasn't one for pity, but he knew pain when he saw it. He'd seen too much of it in his lifetime in the faces of his people. In the trail of bones the white man left behind as they took the land piece by piece, and now, in this frightened stranger, he saw the same kind of wound, though her skin was pale as the moon. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Who is he?" Her lips parted, but she hesitated. The question seemed too heavy, too full of memories she didn't want to give shape to. "He's the one who owns me," she said after a pause. "Or thinks he does." The Apache's brow furrowed slightly. Ownership was not a word his people used for human beings. He understood trade, war, blood debts, but not this. She caught the confusion in his face and lowered her eyes. "I was sold to him when my father's debts got too big. He said I should be grateful he took me in." Her words broke in half, as though saying them out loud made the truth too raw to hold. The Apache said nothing. He crouched down by the stream, dipping his hand into the cold water. After a moment, he motioned toward it. "Drink." The girl hesitated before crawling closer, her movements weak but deliberate. When the water touched her lips, she drank like someone who hadn't tasted anything clean in days. He watched her quietly, his thoughts unreadable, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife out of habit more than threat. When she finished, she looked up at him again. "Will you let me stay with you, just for a night? I'll be gone by sunrise." He shook his head slowly. "A white woman in Apache land, they'll hunt you. Soldiers, ranchers, maybe worse. You bring trouble." She flinched at his words, but didn't back away. "They're already hunting me," she whispered. "If you send me back, you're sending me to my grave." He studied her a long while, as if weighing her soul against the danger she carried. Finally, he turned away and whistled for his horse. "Come," he said, "but if trouble follows, you go." She nodded quickly, a spark of relief flickering in her eyes. He offered no hand to help her climb up. She struggled, managing to settle behind him, clutching the edge of the saddle. The scent of leather and dust filled her senses as they rode deeper into the canyon, the light fading fast. As the stars began to pierce the sky, the first chill of night crept in. The Apache led her to a small camp hidden between two jagged cliffs. A dying fire still glowed from the night before. He tossed a few dry branches on it and sparks rose into the dark, flickering like restless spirits. The girl sat near the flames, hugging her knees, staring into the fire as though it might tell her what came next. The Apache prepared a small meal, dried meat and beans, and handed her a portion without a word. She thanked him softly, her voice small but sincere. He didn't answer, only sat across from her and watched the firelight dance across her face. After a while, she spoke again, more to herself than to him. Do you believe people can change their fate? He didn't look up. Fate is a river. Yeah, we can walk along it or you can drown in it, but you can't stop it from flowing. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. Then maybe I've already drowned. The night fell heavier after that. Coyotes cried in the distance, and the fire burned low. The Apache finally stretched out his blanket and lay down near the edge of camp. Sleep, he said simply. We ride before sunrise. She tried, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made her heart race. The crackle of the fire, the shift of the horse, the sigh of wind through the rocks. Still, there was something strangely safe about his presence, something solid and grounded, like the earth itself was standing guard. Just before dawn, she opened her eyes to find the fire cold and the Apache gone. Panic fluttered in her chest. She rose quickly, scanning the canyon until she saw him on a ridge above, his silhouette outlined against the pale sky. He was watching the horizon, his posture tense, alert. She climbed toward him, her bare feet scraping against the rock. When she reached him, he turned slightly, and she saw what he was watching. 3 riders far in the distance, small dark shapes cutting across the open desert. Her breath caught. They've found me. The Apache didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the riders, calculating distance and time. They ride hard, he said finally. You were right. They're hunting. Her voice shook. What will you do? He turned to her then, and there was no softness left in his face. If they reach this canyon, we both die. Her eyes widened, the fear rising again like a tide she couldn't fight. But before she could speak, he gripped her arm, firm, but not cruel. You must decide, he said. Keep running, or stay and face what comes. She stared at him, the sun's first light catching the tears on her cheeks. I can't go back, she whispered, not to him. The Apache nodded slowly, then stay close. The desert doesn't forgive the weak. Far below, the riders grew clearer. 3 men. One of them in a dark coat that gleamed faintly in the light. The girl's body trembled as she recognized him even from afar. The one she had fled. The man who believed he owned her. The Apache stepped forward, his hand brushing the hilt of his knife, his eyes narrowing as the wind shifted toward them, carrying the faint sound of horses and the promise of blood. The desert held its breath. The girl clutched her chest, heart pounding, torn between terror and the strange. Fragile hope that maybe this time she wasn't alone. And then the first shot echoed through the canyon. The gunshot tore through the morning air, sharp and echoing off the canyon walls. A bird exploded from its nest in a nearby rock, wings flapping wildly as it disappeared into the rising light. The Apache didn't flinch. He crouched low, eyes narrowing toward the mouth of the canyon where dust rose in the distance. The girl froze behind him, her breath caught in her throat, her body shaking from the sound that had once meant punishment, pain, and fear. Stay down, he said, his voice calm but edged with warning. She dropped behind a rock, her fingers digging into the dirt. The Apache moved with the quiet of someone who'd been hunted before. He studied the distance, counting the rhythm of hooves. They were closer now, the riders pushing hard, their shouts faint but growing. He knew the kind of men they were, the ones who rode with money and cruelty in their eyes, who believed every bullet could solve a problem. The girl's eyes darted toward him. I'll kill you if they see you with me, she whispered. You don't have to protect me. I can run again. He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed locked on the canyon floor. Run where? There's no water for miles. You wouldn't make it before the sun breaks you. Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to argue but knew he was right. The desert didn't show mercy to anyone, not even those who had already suffered. She pressed her head against her knees, trying to slow her racing heart. The Apache turned and moved quickly toward his horse. He untied a long piece of cloth from his saddle and handed it to her. Cover your head and face. From far, maybe they'll think you're one of us. Her fingers trembled as she wrapped the cloth around her hair and chin. It smelled faintly of smoke and leather. Why are you helping me? She asked, her voice barely audible. He paused as if the question didn't have a simple answer. Because you asked, he said finally. Then he mounted the horse and looked down the trail again. But that don't mean you're safe. The riders were close enough now that the glint of metal caught the sun. One raised a rifle, and another called out something that echoed through the canyon, words she couldn't fully hear, but knew well enough to feel her stomach twist. She knew that voice. It was his. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "He's coming," she said, the words breaking apart. "You don't understand what he'll do if he finds me." The Apache didn't look at her. His face was like stone. "Then he won't find you." He led her toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall where the shadows deepened. They slipped inside, the passage twisting into darkness. The walls were cool and close, the air heavy with the scent of dust and rock. She had to press close behind him to keep from losing sight of his outline. They walked for what felt like forever until the path opened into a hidden hollow, a natural chamber surrounded by high cliffs and thick brush. The sound of hooves faded outside, replaced by the steady hum of the desert waking under the sun. The Apache stopped and listened, his head tilted slightly. "They'll search for a while," he said, "but they won't find this place." The girl leaned against a rock, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The weight of everything she'd been running from pressed down on her again, heavy and suffocating. She looked up at him, her voice soft but steady. "You don't even know who I am." He met her eyes. "I don't need to." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint hum of wind sweeping through the cliffs. She sank to the ground, hugging her knees. "I used to think if I just ran far enough I could leave him behind, but he always finds me. He's got men in every town, people who owe him favors. I thought if I crossed into your lands he'd stop. I didn't think anyone would follow me here." The Apache sat across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "Men like that don't stop. They think fear is theirs to trade." She nodded weakly. "He doesn't want me back because he loves me. It's because he can't stand the thought of losing control." Her voice cracked. "He told me once that even if I died, I'd still belong to him." The Apache's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened, a shadow passing through them. "You were a prisoner," he said quietly. She nodded. "Yes. But I smiled when he told me to. I learned how to speak only when spoken to. I tried to survive." She looked at him, tears sliding down her face. "And when I finally ran, I didn't even know who I was anymore." The Apache looked away, his jaw tightening, understood more than he wished to admit. His people had known that same feeling, being forced from their land, told what they could and couldn't be. The difference was, they had learned to fight back. He rose and moved toward a small alcove where supplies were hidden. From a bundle wrapped in hide, he pulled out a water skin and handed it to her. "You drink, then rest. We move again when the sun sets." She took it, her hands brushing his for the first time. His skin was rough and scarred, but there was strength in it, not cruel strength, but something grounded and alive. She felt safer in that touch than she had in years. While she drank, he stepped outside the hollow to watch the sky. The light was growing harsh now, cutting across the rocks in bright streaks. Somewhere out there, those riders were circling, trying to pick up a trail. He knew they'd return once the heat eased. And if they brought more men next time, there would be no hiding. Inside, the girl lay back against the cool stone, eyes half closed. Mind drifted to memory. She tried to bury the grand house with its cold marble floors. The sound of boots in the hallway, the way she used to stare at the horizon through her window and dream of a different life. She'd once thought freedom would feel like open skies. But freedom came with fear too, and loneliness that reached deep. She opened her eyes to find the Apache standing near the entrance again, silent and alert. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer for a moment. "Names are for those who need to be found," he said finally. She gave a small, tired smile. "Then maybe I don't have one either." He looked at her then, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. "You'll need one," he said. "The desert remembers the nameless. It buries them." Before she could reply, a faint sound broke through the stillness, the distant ring of metal against rock. The Apache's head snapped up. "You're still searching," he said under his breath. He motioned for her to stay low as he crept toward the entrance. Peering out, he saw them, two of the riders dismounted near the stream, examining the ground. One of them crouched, pointing to faint tracks in the dirt. The third man sat tall on his horse, his dark coat glinting under the sun. Even from a distance, the Apache could feel the weight of the man's stare as if it cut straight through the canyon. He stepped back into the shadows. "They're close," he said. Her heart leaped into her throat. "What are we going to do?" took his knife from its sheath and checked the edge. We wait. The hours dragged like stones. The heat thickened and sweat traced lines down their skin. Every sound outside made the girl's pulse race. She wanted to speak, to ask how long they could hide, but his stillness silenced her. When the sun finally began to dip, the Apache moved again. "They've gone for now," he said quietly, "but they'll be back." "Then what?" she asked. "Look toward the horizon." "We head north." "There's a trading post by the river. Maybe someone there can help you." Her voice trembled. "You mean leave me there?" His eyes met hers, hard, but not unkind. "It's better than dying out here." She didn't argue. Deep down she knew he was right. But as night fell and the fire burned low again, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man who hunted her wouldn't stop until one of them was gone. The Apache didn't sleep. He sat watching the stars while the girl finally drifted off, her head resting against the rock. His thoughts were heavy. Circling the strange pull he felt toward her, a woman from a world that had taken everything from his. Maybe helping her was foolish. Maybe it would bring more pain. But as the desert wind moved through the canyon, he decided that no matter the cost, he wouldn't let her be taken again. Far beyond the cliffs, 3 horses moved quietly under the moonlight. The man in the dark coat lifted his lantern, eyes burning with anger and obsession. He turned to his men and pointed toward the north ridge. "She's out there," he said, "and whoever's helping her will pay for it." The desert wind carried his voice just far enough for the Apache to hear faintly in the distance. His jaw clenched. The chase had only just begun. The wind cut through the canyon like a living thing, carrying the smell of dust and danger. The Apache had been awake for hours, watching the horizon with quiet intensity. The girl stirred beside the fading fire, her face pale in the cold light of dawn. The night had given them no rest, only silence heavy with the knowledge that they were being hunted. He had counted 3 riders the day before, but he knew enough about men like them to expect more by now. He turned toward her. "We ride now," he said. "The sun will rise soon. Once it does, we'll have no place to hide." She nodded weakly, rubbing her arms to chase away the chill. Her body ached from the days of running, but fear kept her moving. The Apache handed her a piece of dried bread and a strip of meat. She ate quietly, glancing around the canyon that had sheltered them for one more night. "Do you think they're close?" she asked. His eyes moved toward the north ridge. Close enough to smell the trail. They packed quickly. The Apache tied the few supplies they had to the horse and checked his knife again. He could feel it in his bones. Now the chase tightening around them. When they set off, the morning light was still soft, stretching long shadows across the rocks. The horses' hooves beat steady against the dirt as they followed a narrow trail that wound toward higher ground. After some time, the girl broke the silence. "You said there's a trading post ahead. What's it like?" He kept his gaze forward. "A place where men trade things they don't need for things they think they do. Sometimes it's safe. Sometimes it's not. Do you trust them?" "I don't trust anyone who builds fences." She gave a faint, tired smile at that, but her thoughts were far away. The idea of reaching the post gave her hope, though a small voice inside warned her that hope was a dangerous thing. Every mile they covered only reminded her of the man she was running from, the sound of his boots, the look in his eyes when she had told him no. By midday, the desert heat pressed down like an iron weight. The Apache stopped near a cluster of rocks where a few scraggly trees offered thin shade. He motioned for her to rest while he climbed higher to scout the trail behind them. She sat in the shadow of a boulder, her legs trembling from exhaustion. For the first time, she looked at her reflection in the canteen water. The face that stared back at her hardly looked familiar. The girl who had once lived behind white walls and fine curtains was gone. In her place was someone leaner, harder, but still afraid. The Apache returned quietly, his expression dark. "They're closer than I thought," he said. 2 more joined them. Her heart sank. "Then they'll catch us. Not if we move fast. There's a pass ahead that opens into the plains. Once we cross, their horses will tire before mine." She stood, her breath unsteady. "And if they don't?" He glanced at her, his tone steady. "Ain't then we fight." They mounted again and pressed on. The canyon narrowed into a winding path where the sound of hooves echoed strangely, making it hard to tell if someone followed. Every shadow looked alive. Every gust of wind carried the weight of danger. The girl kept glancing back, half expecting to see the riders emerge from the dust at any moment. As the sun dipped lower, they reached the edge of the pass's steep slope leading into open plains below. The land stretched endlessly, painted gold and red by the fading light. It was beautiful, but exposed. The Apache stopped, studying the open ground. "No cover for miles," he muttered. "Then we'll be seen." "Yes," he said quietly, "but we'll be free of these walls." Before he could say more, a faint sound rose from behind them, the sharp echo of a horse's neigh. Both froze. The Apache turned his head slowly, scanning the canyon. The dust lifted in the distance, and this time it wasn't the wind. "They found us," he said. Her pulse spiked. "What do we do?" He looked down the slope, then at her. "Hold tight." With a sharp command, he drove the horse forward. They plunged down the rocky incline, the animal's hooves slipping and sliding through the loose soil. The girl clung to his waist, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by another gunshot that cracked through the air. A bullet struck a rock near her foot, sending shards flying. She screamed but didn't let go. They reached the flat land and sped across it, the wind roaring in their ears. The Apache leaned low over the horse's neck, urging it faster. The riders were behind them now, 5 in total, their coats dark against the bright desert. The lead rider raised his arm and fired again. The sound seemed to stretch forever before fading into the emptiness. After what felt like hours, the Apache slowed the horse near a line of dead trees. The animal was breathing hard, foam streaking its neck. The girl could barely hold herself upright. "Are we safe?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. But they'll have to stop soon for water." He helped her down and she almost fell, her legs too weak to hold her. He caught her arms, steadying her. "You have to rest," he said. She nodded, sinking onto the ground. The Apache scanned the horizon again. The sun was gone now, leaving the world painted in blue and gold shadows. Far in the distance, lightning flickered, storm clouds gathering over the plains. As the first drops began to fall, he built a small fire under a ledge of rock. The girl watched him work, her eyes tracing the movements of his hands. "You've done this before," she said softly. "Too many times. Running." He looked up at her, surviving. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow across their faces. The sound of rain grew louder, the scent of wet dust filling the air. For a while neither spoke. The storm gave them a strange kind of protection. The riders would have to stop until it passed. Finally she said, "You could leave me. You'd be safe." He looked at her for a long time. There's no safety in leaving someone to die. Her throat tightened, wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her chest. Instead, she whispered, "I never thought anyone would help me again." He turned back to the fire. "You shouldn't have to beg for that." The rain fell harder, drumming against the rocks. In the distance, thunder rolled like a warning. The girl leaned closer to the fire, trying to absorb its warmth. "When you said your people knew fear like mine, what did you mean?" The Apache's gaze was fixed on the flames. "We were driven from our land, told where to live, how to speak, what to believe. They called it peace. But peace built on chains is just another kind of war." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe we're not so different." The storm raged through the night, lightning cutting the sky in sharp flashes. At one point she thought she saw movement in the darkness, figures on horseback, distant but waiting. She blinked and they were gone. When dawn came, the land was silent again. The Apache was already awake, saddling the horse. She rose, her body aching, and looked out across the plains. "They'll come again, won't they?" He nodded. "They always do." As they rode north, the landscape began to change. Grass replaced sand, and the wind carried the scent of water. By afternoon, they reached the edge of a river. Across it stood a small settlement, wooden buildings, smoke rising from a chimney, a few wagons parked near the shore. "That's the trading post?" she asked. "Yes." He studied it carefully. "We'll get supplies, maybe a new horse. Then you can decide where to go." Her stomach twisted at his words. She didn't want to decide. She didn't want to leave the only person who had protected her, but she said nothing. They crossed the shallow river, the cold water splashing their legs. When they reached the other side, a man stepped out from one of the cabins, wiping his hands on a rag. He squinted at them. "You're far from town," he said. "What brings you out here?" "Trade," the Apache said simply. The man's eyes lingered on the girl, narrowing slightly. She yours? Before the Apache could answer, the girl spoke. I'm traveling with him. The man studied them both, suspicion flickering behind his eyes. Be careful, he said finally. There have been riders asking questions. One of them's offering good money for a girl who looks a bit like you. The girl's breath caught, but the Apache didn't react. We'll be gone by night, he said. Inside the post, they bought supplies. Dried food, water, a blanket. The Apache noticed the way the trader kept glancing toward the window as if expecting company. He finished quickly and led her outside. As they mounted up, a distant sound rose against the faint thunder of hooves. The girl turned, her face pale. He didn't need to look to know. The chase had caught up. Ride, he said sharply. They took off across the open field, the sound of gunfire cracking behind them once more. The wind howled around them, the world blurring into motion. The Apache pushed the horse harder, every muscle tense. Ahead, the land sloped upward toward a ridge. If they could reach it, they might lose sight. But the riders were faster now, closing in. The girl clung to him, her voice breaking. They're too close. He glanced back. The man in the dark coat was there, leading the charge, his face twisted in fury. The Apache turned forward again, his voice calm but sharp. Hold on. The ridge loomed ahead, steep and narrow, the edge crumbling beneath the wind. The sound of the pursuers grew louder, the pounding of hooves shaking the ground. The Apache drove the horse upward, the beast straining beneath them. As they reached the top, he turned for one last look. The riders were climbing fast, guns raised. The girl's hand tightened on his arm. Now what? She whispered. He stared at the drop ahead, a sheer fall into the river gorge below, wild and unforgiving. He didn't answer. He just met her eyes and said quietly, "Trust me." Then the horse leapt forward toward the edge as the next shot rang out. The air split with the sound of the shot as the horse launched off the ridge. The world turned into a rush of wind, dust, and fear. The girl clung to the Apache with every bit of strength left in her, her scream lost in the roar of the fall. For a moment, she thought it was the end. The river below rose up to meet them like a wall of white and blue, and then everything went black. When she opened her eyes, the world was quiet, except for the soft rush of water and the faint cry of distant birds. Pain pulsed through her body, but she was alive. She lay half in the river, half on the bank, soaked and shivering. The sky above her was pale, the color of early morning. She tried to move and gasped. Her body ached, but nothing seemed broken. Then panic struck her heart. She turned her head, searching the water. The Apache was lying a few feet away, motionless, his arm caught in the reeds. The horse was gone, swept downriver. She crawled toward him, pulling herself across the wet stones. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't be dead." She pressed her ear against his chest, and relief flooded her when she heard it. A slow, steady heartbeat. He was breathing. She dragged him farther up the bank, her arms trembling with the effort. He groaned faintly, his eyes fluttering open. "You're alive," she said, her voice breaking with tears and laughter all at once. He blinked at the sky, then at her. "We made it," he murmured. "Barely," she answered. They sat there for a long while, catching their breath. The fall had taken everything from them, their horse, their supplies, and nearly their lives. But they had escaped. The gunfire was gone, the riders far above on the ridge. The sound of their shouts faded into the wind. The Apache sat up slowly, wincing as he touched his shoulder. "We'll need to move," he said. "They might search the river." The girl looked at him, eyes tired but filled with something new. Resolve. "I'll follow you." They walked along the riverbank for hours, the land slowly flattening as they moved north. The sun climbed higher, drying their clothes, warming their skin. Every step was painful, but they didn't stop. The Apache's movements were slower now, his injury worse than he let on. The girl noticed the blood seeping through the fabric at his shoulder, but when she tried to help, he only shook his head. "You should rest," she said gently. "Later," he answered. They followed the river until they found a shallow bend where the water was calm and clear. There the Apache finally stopped. He knelt and washed the wound, his hands steady despite the pain. The girl tore a strip from her dress and tied it around his arm. He gave her a faint nod of thanks. As they sat together by the river, The quiet felt almost unreal. For the first time in days, there were no shouts, no gunfire, no pounding of hooves. Just the soft murmur of water and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The girl stared at her reflection in the rippling surface. "Do you think they'll stop looking for me?" The Apache looked toward the horizon. "A man like that doesn't give up. But the desert is bigger than his reach." She smiled faintly. "Then I'll stay here." He turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. "This land isn't kind to those who don't understand it." "Then teach me," she said quietly. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "If you learn to listen to the land, it will keep you." Over the next few days, they built a small shelter from branches and stones near the river. The Apache hunted and taught her how to move quietly, how to read the signs of the earth, tracks in the dirt, wind direction, the meaning of bird calls. She listened to everything, hungry to understand. Each night they shared stories by the fire. He told her about his people, the songs they sang, the battles they'd fought, the things they'd lost. She spoke of her old life, of the empty mansion filled with silence, of the man who called love a possession. "You were never his," the Apache said one night, his tone firm but calm. "You were never anyone's to own." The words stayed with her. For the first time, she began to believe them. But peace was fragile. One afternoon, as the sun began to sink, the Apache spotted something in the distance. A faint line of smoke, too thin and steady to be from nature. He watched it for a long time, then said quietly, "They've found the river." The girl's heart sank. "What do we do?" He looked at her with calm resolve. "We finish this." They packed what little they had and climbed toward the ridge above the river. The sky was turning red, the color of blood and fire. From the high ground, they could see riders moving through the lowland, scanning both sides of the water. At the front rode the man in the dark coat. Even from far away, she could feel his presence like a weight pressing down on her chest. The Apache watched him, silent and unreadable. Then he turned to her. "If I don't make it, you keep going north. There's a town 2 days' ride from the next river bend. Tell him you came from the west." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I won't leave you. You will if you have to," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes held something deeper, not fear, but acceptance. As the riders drew closer, the Apache motioned for her to stay hidden among the rocks. He stepped out slowly, his figure tall and still against the dying light. The men halted, startled to see him alive. The man in the dark coat dismounted, his boots crunching against the dirt. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble," he said. "Where's the girl?" "She's free," the Apache replied. The man's lip curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can keep her from me?" "She belongs to me. The law says so." The Apache's gaze didn't waver. "Your laws mean nothing here." The man raised his gun. "Then maybe I'll make my own law." The girl couldn't stay hidden any longer. She stepped out from behind the rocks, her voice shaking but clear. "You'll have to kill me first." The man turned, shock flickering across his face. "You foolish thing. After all I gave you?" "You gave me chains," she said, cutting him off. "And I'm done wearing them." Before he could speak again, the Apache moved. It was fast, a blur of motion, the sound of struggle, the gun firing once, echoing through the canyon. Dust filled the air, and the girl screamed his name. When it cleared, the man in the dark coat was on the ground, his gun fallen beside him. The Apache stood over him, breathing hard, blood seeping through his bandage. The man groaned, clutching his side. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You can't hide forever." The Apache looked down at him. "Maybe not," he said, "but she doesn't need to." He turned away, motioning for the girl to follow. Together they walked toward the river, leaving the man behind in the fading light. The air was quiet again, heavy but peaceful. When they reached the water's edge, the girl turned to him, tears in her eyes. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "You saved yourself the moment you ran." She smiled through the tears, knowing he was right. The fight, the fear, the running, it had all led her to this moment of freedom. They followed the river north for 2 more days, the land slowly softening into grass and wildflowers. The Apache's wound began to heal, though he grew quieter with each passing mile. The girl knew their paths would soon part, though neither spoke of it. At last they reached the edge of a small town by the river. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of voices drifted through the air. The Apache stopped on the ridge, looking down at it. "This is where we say goodbye," he said. She turned to him, her heart tightening. "Will I ever see you again?" He smiled faintly. "The desert remembers those who walk it with truth. Maybe it will carry my shadow to you." She didn't know how to answer. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what his kindness had meant, but words felt too small. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. For a moment, they stood in silence, the river flowing beside them like time itself. Then she walked down toward the town, each step lighter than the one before. When she looked back, he was gone, vanished into the endless horizon where sky met land. The girl stood for a moment, breathing the scent of fresh earth and smoke. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had found freedom not in escape, but in courage, in choosing her own path. As she walked toward the sound of life, she whispered to the wind, "Thank you." Far behind her, the desert stretched wide and golden under the sun. Silent but alive, holding the memory of a promise made and kept, that no one, no matter how broken or lost, was ever truly beyond saving.